Let's now move to the report out by Revathi Advaithi, representing the Manufacturing Competitiveness Subcommittee. Revathi will speak for the first part of this session. She'll accept questions from the audience. And then with about 5 minutes left, I'll call for a full committee vote on each of the 5 sets of recommendations from the subcommittee. So Revathi's committee has a number of recommendations, and they've grouped them into 5 topics. So we'll do 5 votes, 1 for each of the topics. And I'll sort of remind you of what each of those topics are as we go through the votes at the end of the session. Revathi?
Okay, great. Thank you, Jeff. And before I start, I'll tell you that I'm dialing in from international travel. So if I lose connection for any reason, Willie is going to take over for me. So this is the work of the Manufacturing Supply Chain Competitiveness Subcommittee. And of course, it represents a lot of work by the members and our staff. So if we go to the next slide, what you'll see listed here is our subcommittee members. And we really want to thank our staff because they all did a crazy amount of heavy lifting here to help us prepare for these proposals. And I really want to thank Willie, who also did a lot of work in bringing all of this together. So we started with the problem of how to strengthen critical industry sectors that are essential to U.S. national and economic security. But as you know, this is a huge multifaceted problem and has been years in the making. And we're under no illusion that it can be solved overnight. But what we decided to do was upfront that we should try to come up with some fresh, actionable ideas and at least get them on the table to stimulate some discussion. And as Secretary Raimondo mentioned in her opening, there's no silver bullet and there is not just one answer. So our approach was to put together a list of ideas that could help advise the direction and strategy of our government. So going to the next slide, at a high level, what we believe is that increasing resiliency, I'm waiting for the slide to move, but I'll continue talking, is increasing resiliency and revitalizing the US manufacturing base really requires investments in factories and in advanced technologies, in workers, and competitive and sustainable energy costs. It also requires making these investments more attractive. Forward these recommendations at this particular meeting, we are continuing to do work on them. So we chose to focus on critical sectors that were identified in the President's 100-day report and other US studies where our subcommittee members have expertise. And we believe that each of these sectors have good potential for increased domestic production and good job creation, but requires support and investment to increase resiliency. So going to the next slide, I'd say that we set the table by looking at 4 cross-cutting themes. One is sustainability and resilience. The second was systematic workforce issues, policy and regulation, and technology shifts. Then we drew on the areas of expertise in our subcommittee, and we had a wide variety of expertise in these subsectors to propose ideas in each of these categories. And what you'll see for the ideas are clustered in 5 categories. So I'm going to describe these recommendations in these 5. Lily, if you could move forward.
Yeah, it's just slow catching up to you, but it's displaying that slide. Revathi, yeah, okay, good.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Adjustments to immigration policies, critical industries identified in the President's 100-day report, as well. But you'll see that we have a unique angle on this. And then some forward-looking recommendations for ensuring that America leads in important industries of the future. This we think, like everybody has said, the time is now. And we just didn't want to focus on areas where we have catch up to do, but we also wanted to focus on areas where we think our country is in the lead today, and we want to protect that lead. So this is an important way that the committee thought through and worked through these actions. If you go to the next slide, I'll talk through the first grouping of proposals. So these are first three proposals, and we all know it's about the availability of workers. Indra just talked about this, right? So we know hiring people has been incredibly challenging, especially for people in manufacturing, in warehousing, in logistics, and in retail. My company feels it, and every individual in the subcommittee talked about how difficult this was. The first group of proposals really concerns how to quickly improve the availability of workers and maybe help people who could use a little extra income in the face of inflation. The first idea is to suspend the penalty for people who work while collecting Social Security retirement or survivor benefits prior to reaching full retirement age. Let's say you were laid off when the pandemic hit, or you decided to retire early before you reach the full retirement age 67. So if you now want to go back to work and you're younger than 67, you give up $1 for every $2 earned, about $19,500. Let's suspend that for people who retired before July 1st this year, and will help a lot of people who are struggling with inflation and bring some experienced workers back in, especially we think it'll be critical in food, in grocery, and in manufacturing. The next one is to suspend the benefit penalty for people with disabilities who work while collecting supplemental Social Security income or Social Security disability insurance, and guarantee continued access to Medicare and Medicaid. Same idea here, remove the economic disincentive for those with the disabilities who are able to work and take on additional hours. And then the third one here is to build a coalition of businesses dedicated to hiring formerly incarcerated people. This is not a quick fix, we understand that, but the Department of Justice and Department of Labor already are doing work in this area, and the Biden-Harris administration has already taken multiple steps to expand second chance opportunities. And the idea here is to partner more with private sector champions and to build a coalition of businesses dedicated to help make this problem better. So moving on to the next slide. The last idea in this section is to encourage owner-operators in trucking to use slip seating as a way of increasing capacity. And it's really about trying to get more work out of the existing capacity that we have. And we all talked about kind of how difficult labor is in the trucking industry. So those are all the proposals in this section. And Jeff, should I wait for questions on this or move to the next one and ask for questions in the end?
No, let's move to the next one. Let's get through all five, and then we can open it up for questions on any of the five, okay? Okay,
perfect. Okay, so the next two proposals have to do with making sure we have the workforce we need, but we're staying away from immigration reform as it's a big contentious subject. So we chose to focus on some simple things that we really think are tweaks to existing policies. So the first proposal is about our fresh food supply chain, where the biggest challenge faced by farm operations was availability of workers. 60% of fresh fruit and 35% of fresh vegetables consumed in America are now imported. So from 2017 to 2020, aggregate vegetable imports grew from 13.2 billion to 19.2 billion. Higher US farm costs have driven increasing import dependence for fresh fruits and vegetables, much of which has gotten caught in bottlenecks along import trade lanes. So this further reduces resilience in the US food supply chain, driving up costs for the American consumer. Our idea here is simple: to reduce the administrative burden in the H-2A visa program for migrant farm workers by granting multi-year certification to those workers who achieve A ratings after their first or second year. So, the application right now is 36 pages long, and it takes a lawyer to fill it out. So we suggest that making it easier for good workers to come back and not to have to go through this process year after year would be a good idea. And it also reduces the administrative burden, which would be great. The second idea is to direct more worker visa allocation to critical skill shortages, particularly in key manufacturing fields, which really need some advanced technologies. So this is our second grouping of ideas. I'll go to the next slide. The third set of recommendations applies to the critical industries identified in the President's 100-day report. Now, the first one is to leverage DoD or other government purchases to develop and upgrade the capabilities of SME, which is small, medium enterprise, domestic printed circuit board manufacturers, by establishing a predictable demand signal for critical products destined for domestic use, which is always the challenge for SMEs, where they just don't have a consistent flow through of products that they're able to supply demand for. Now, PCBs are the foundation of any electronic assembly and are found in a wide range of products. HR 7677, the Supporting American PCBA Act of 2022, calls for more domestic manufacturing, R&D, and tax incentives. But we think that establishing a good demand signal and incentivizing the deployment of really good advanced manufacturing and assembly technologies and new process innovations will really help rebuild this sector. The next proposal is to convene a targeted interagency industry workshop to identify gaps and drivers affecting healthcare product supply chain and to provide more actionable direction on short and long-term infrastructure investments. Now, this would mean leveraging the FDA's very unique position in having visibility across many medical devices and pharma supply chains. And we think that using this information to really build a resilient supply chain would be very important to American resiliency in the future. Now, the third proposal is to review and adjust the purchasing criteria that Agricultural Marketing Services uses for the USDA food program and other procurement guidance to support producer diversity and improve labor and safety standards in the food production and manufacturing supply chain. The idea here is to use existing purchases to promote more diversification in government buying rather than concentration, which has been the case. So moving on to the next slide. The next four proposals, there are four, and I'll quickly run through them. These all have to do with materials that are critical to American economy, but where we no longer have strong production capabilities domestically. The common thread across all of these is that in each sector, there's a technology transition happening. So this is the time, right? The time is now that we could leverage to leapfrog incumbents who are using older technology. The first concern that we're talking about is the manufacturing of critical medicines using new continuous flow and on-demand process technology platforms, and offers the US a unique opportunity to change the game and leapfrog incumbents today who are saddled with a very batch process, and that's the install base that they have today. So what we're proposing here is to use advanced market commitment purchases for the Human Health and Services, the Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response, as well as DoD purchases for medical countermeasures to give startups working in this area a strong demand signal and a stable cash flow to get them established. The second one that we're thinking about that we're proposing here is to leverage the DoD purchases to upgrade the capabilities of SME, small and medium enterprise, the domestic casting firms by mandating the use of 3D solid modeling software and additive manufacturing technology in their casting processes. This would give companies the incentive to upgrade their capabilities. And this is an important data point that engineered castings are used to produce 90% of all durable goods and nearly all manufacturing machinery. So this is vital capability to have in this country, and we seem to be losing that capability. Domestic producers really can get into this business if they have predictable demand and they have costs and returns that they know they can be successful to compete for global market share. So we need to help them. And then the next one is about titanium. There's a lot of conversation happening about titanium. As most of you probably know by now, it's critical for a wide range of defense and commercial applications. The US is the largest consumer of titanium, no surprise, metal feedstocks for high-end applications in aerospace and defense, but we have no remaining domestic production. Again, the opportunity is to use new process technologies to restore domestic production, and we think this would provide a jump start. And the fourth proposal is a little bit more speculative, but it suggests restoring and expanding the funding for the National Defense Stockpile Transaction Fund, and to stop the diversion of the NDS funds to other programs and call for the whole of the government approach to accelerated research and investment in new technologies for metal extraction from unconventional sources like the oil field brines. Now, this is for things metal-like, like lithium and rare earth metals, which we all know is critical for the subsistence of the industry in the future, and that today we don't get a lot of that from the US. And all of this was identified in the President's 100-day report as well. Okay, moving on to the next slide. The last set of proposals are more forward-looking. And they arose from our discussion because, we shouldn't only try to recover things we lost, as I said in the beginning, but we should try to ensure that we lead in fields that are critical to our future. Here it is about life sciences, where we continue to be very strong. So the first proposal in this group argues really for a more holistic approach to medical products, streamlining and harmonizing the global regulatory framework for medical components and products. It suggests a pilot for diagnostics supporting respiratory illnesses such as COVID or influenza and RSV, and that take advantage of global emergency authorization pathways, which is already in place, but come up with a more streamlined and harmonized regulatory evaluation framework and do that globally. It also suggests a voluntary public-private partnership program for developing and maintaining domestic infrastructure and capacity for this. And then the second proposal is to launch a national initiative to strengthen the nation's life sciences R&D ecosystem. And this is to strengthen long-term competitiveness, but to improve biotherapeutic access, and then further fossil fuel independent industrial manufacturing. This, we think, will also foster the revolution in biotherapeutic discovery and manufacturing in gene and cell therapies, but also it'll enable petrochemical feedstock substitution for things like agriculture, chemical flavors, and fragrances. So I'll end by saying that our subcommittee has additional work that is still in progress. I know this seems like a lot that we talked about today, but there was really a lot of ideas, and we were trying to bring it to a few that we could bring to the table today. But there is additional work that's still in progress that wasn't completed in time for this meeting. But based on all the feedback that we have, we'll continue to work on that. So with that, I'll hand it back to Jeff.
Let's take, we have up to 15 minutes for questions. If there are no more, we can go directly to a vote, but like to open the floor for any questions that members of the committee or or other participants have for Revathi and her subcommittee.
Doesn't seem like there's any questions. So from a member of the subcommittee, I just wanted to give a huge thank you to Revathi and Willie, who kept us all between the guardrails and moving forward here for some of these proposals. So nice job, team.
Gary has his hand up.
Thanks, Renner.
Good afternoon, everybody. And Revathi, wonderful job. I'm very supportive of all the recommendations. I just on the visas. I was on President Obama's Jobs Council years ago, and I'm sure the idea was there long before our suggestion, but there was this notion of, quote, stapling a green card to a diploma. Is that, I don't know where we are with that. Is that essentially what the recommendation is for the more skilled jobs vis-a-vis immigration?
I would say, and please, anybody else in my subcommittee jump into, that idea still exists. It didn't go anywhere, as you know, but what we really want to do is some form of accelerated immigration for advanced technology degree holders is what we are recommending, whether it comes in the form of a green card or whether it comes in the form of visa approvals. But particularly in critical technology, where we feel like either America could gain with a lead into that area, there should be some form of an expedited visa, and obviously the green card would be an even better approach.
Thank you.
Great question. Are there any others? While we're waiting for the hands to go up, I neglected to introduce Revathi properly, so let me just do that really quickly and embarrass her for a moment. Revathi is the Chief Executive Officer of Flex. She became CEO in February of 2019 with the goal of leading Flex through a new era in manufacturing. She's on the board of directors of Uber and Catalyst.org. She's a member of the Business Roundtable and the Catalyst CEO Champions for Change Initiative. Revathi is recognized as one of Fortune's most powerful women in business for the last couple of years, and named one of Business Today's most powerful women in India. And I couldn't be more grateful, Revathi, for your leadership. As you mentioned, the subcommittee went through quite a few proposals, and I think the very articulate summary that you just went through is evidence of the great thinking that's behind each of these.
Thank you, Jeff. I think everybody in our subcommittee is very passionate about seeing the growth of manufacturing in the United States, and so there was really a long list of ideas that we got to work with.
If there are no other questions, let's move to a vote. But first, whoever's controlling the screen, would you put it back into gallery mode? So remove the PowerPoint so we can see everybody. I want to be able to use this to check on the nays, especially. So, at this time, let's vote on each set of recommendations. Again, there were 5. I'll remind you of the topic, and then I'd ask for everyone to use the Microsoft Teams reactions and raise your hand buttons. Sorry, and we're doing Zoom, so I have to now, you see at the bottom, so it's not Microsoft Teams, it's, you see the raise hand at the bottom button. Yeah, somebody just did it, thank you. So rather than have a chorus of ayes and nays, we'll use this feature to record the votes of the full committee members. And this again is vote by all committee members. So the first of the recommendation topics is improving the availability of workers. So if you're in favor of this, please click the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen.
I have a question. What if there are some proposals embedded in the package that are yes and 1 or 2 that are no? How do you denote that?
I think, Liz, this would be appropriate right here to describe the things that you're worried about. And so if that would be I would argue that's a nay vote on the full package, but it'd be really helpful to understand the things that you think need more work.
Sure. Well, we raised this in the subcommittee. And so just to reiterate our concerns around the Social Security piece, we think that this might be out of the scope of this particular committee. It's a very complicated system, right? With a lot of reverberations. And so when you start tinkering with one idea, it reverberates throughout the entire system. So we had raised concerns about that. And so I think those two proposals were the ones in particular that we had concerns with. So I just wanted to raise that.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Liz, for that. I'll anybody else who is an aye for the full set of proposals, please make sure you click the raise hand. Okay, and let's lower our hands and let's go back to the nays. So I want to make sure that we record if there's anybody else. So Liz has some concerns about specifically the Social Security, the complexity of adjusting the Social Security incentives as recommended. Anybody else opposed to one or more of the topics or the ideas in the first set of topics? Okay, so recorded. Thank you. Thanks, Liz. Let's go to the second set of topics. It's an adjustment to immigration policies. Please raise your hand if you're in favor. This is for the full committee members. All right, thank you. And anybody opposed, please raise your hand. But first, everybody should lower their hand that had raised it. Okay, so on the adjustment to immigration policies, if you're opposed, please raise your hand. Okay, we have a couple of committee members who are opposed. David, are you're a nay on this one? Okay, thank you. So this one looks to be unanimous. Wait, David, you are opposed on immigration? No, okay. Thank you. All right, let's go to the third one, which is recommendations for the 3 critical industries identified in the president's 100-day report. Please raise your hand if you support this recommendation. Okay. And please lower your hands. All those opposed, please raise your hand. I see no opposition. Thank you. Let's go to the fourth one, which is stimulating U.S. resiliency of critical industries with some very specific recommendations. Please raise your hand if you're in favor.
Can you remind us which ones are in each package again, please? I'm having a hard time following this.
Sure. If whoever's controlling the PowerPoint, would you pull up number 4? Topics number 4, which is stimulating U.S. resiliency of critical industries. There you go. Does that help, Liz?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Go ahead and pull that down so we can see all the votes. Again, we're voting in favor. Raise your hand, please. Please lower your hands. And let's do anyone opposed. Please raise your hand. Okay, this one carries. And then the fifth would be the forward-looking recommendations for ensuring America leads in important industries for the future. Please raise your hand here. We understand that there's more work to do to continue to flesh this one out.
Can you put the
Okay.
slide up again? I'm sorry.
Sure, no problem. Whoever's controlling the, Caroline? PowerPoint, this, or Willie, sorry, this would, yeah, this would be the, there you go. All right, let's remove the PowerPoint, good. Lower your hand. And let's go to, please raise your hand if you're opposed to these two recommendations.
I'm abstaining. Just to note for the record,
Okay. Thanks,
just
Liz.
because we need additional vetting and we, you know, we didn't want to commit to anything that we didn't have thorough vetting on.
Okay. And these as described in more detail, make it clear that there's more work to be done on number 5. So this would just be essentially approving additional work and refinement. Okay. And David, are you a nay? Okay, good. Okay.
And, you know, since I wasn't following the slides earlier, I wanted to just loop back if it's possible, because there were additional ones that we wanted to vote no on that I wasn't keeping up with. I apologize. So should I just note those for you for the record, or should I get that back to you, or how do you want to handle that?
I think it's appropriate to note them for the record. So the first one was nay to improving the availability of workers.
The Social Security piece.
Particularly the Social Security piece, yep. There was, you abstained from number 5. 2 is the 2 immigration policies.
Yeah, we had on the issue of additional work visa allocations for highly educated immigrant students in key advanced manufacturing fields. Thought there were some good elements to it, of course, but we had concerns again about the notion of the total number of visas, you know, and absent comprehensive immigration reform, how that would then dovetail with the additional concerns we have around immigration policy writ large, similar to Social Security, because it's a broader set of issues that kind of have a reverberation. So that was particularly the one piece I didn't get a chance to weigh in on. And then the other one, whichever package it landed in, was the regulatory approval process, maintaining U.S. competitive leadership on new medical products.
Yeah, I think that was E. That was the one that 5, which is the one that you abstained on.
That one, as well as the synthetic, industrial biology. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
So we'll note those. And, you know, I think the point about understanding the systemic implication of any policy change, the Social Security, the immigration ones, is a good one. And, you know, obviously there's more work to be done to flesh out these recommendations. You know, Liz, what I take away from your comments is that notionally you think there's something interesting about each of these, but you want to make sure that we understand the full system implications before Commerce would recommend some policy change.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I want to thank you, Revathi, and the members of the subcommittee for your leadership and hard work. This is obviously based on the dialogue that we've had. This is a really complicated set of things to consider. And I think you, in a short period of time, made a lot of progress in sort of sifting through all the different vectors of potential improvement to land on a few that are really worth strong consideration by the department. Thank you. Let's now move to the, thanks, Revathi. Let's now move to the report out by Jean Soroka, representing the Freight Movement Policy and Infrastructure Subcommittee. As in the prior report out, Gene will speak for the first part of this session. He'll accept any questions from the audience. And then with about 5 minutes left, I'll call for a full committee vote on each of the 3 sets of recommendations from this subcommittee. And Gene, rather than make the mistake I made with Revathi, let me run through your bio and a bit of embarrassment real quickly. So Gene is the executive director of the Port of Los Angeles. I can personally attest to the breadth of geography that Gene's purview covers. I had the opportunity to tour the port Port of LA with Gene, and he and his team are incredibly knowledgeable about the operations, and the amount of freight that's flowing through is just staggering. Gene serves as the executive director of the Port of LA, which has experienced historic record-breaking performances since his appointment in 2014. As executive director of the busiest container port in North America, Gene manages a budget of over $1.7 billion to advance major capital projects, growing trade volumes, and promoting innovative and sustainable practices that strengthen the region's economy. He's had several key positions in sales and management for American President Lines, APL Limited, prior to joining the port. And I learned in our travel around the port with Gene how much experience he had with ports around the world, which gives him the ability to benchmark our performance at US ports against others with which we compete. He currently serves as the Chief Logistics Officer for the city of Los Angeles as well. So Gene, thank you very much.
Thanks, Mr. Co-Chair. And I represent today the Freight Infrastructure and Policy Subcommittee and the work of just a few that I'd like to comment on here. Rick Blaskin, Doug Siva, Matt Cornelius, Bob Costello, Jason Craig, Don Frison, along with Gary Kelly, Barbara Melvin, Sean O'Brien, Jim Phillips, Mike Perdue, and Juan Vila. Tremendous work across a series of meetings and information sharing sessions to date. And special commendation to Rain Thompson of Sunkist, along with David Libatique and Aveen Sharma here at the Port of Los Angeles, who did a lot of the heavy lifting and the pre-planning and all the follow-up work to get not only this presentation, draft format of recommendations for communication with the Secretary and others in place. So much appreciated for everyone's participation and involvement. We thought going into this, there were a couple of core tenets that we wanted to pursue. One was we knew we couldn't boil the ocean. So we wanted to be fairly strategic and put forward some actionable items at the cabinet level within the Biden-Harris administration. And secondly, we didn't want to be duplicative. We got a little bit of a late running start as this particular FACA committee was reconstituted, and there had been ongoing work in other agencies on the ground throughout the nation in both the public and private sectors. So we tried to focus on areas that had not been tackled to the extent that we would like as a subcommittee. So we've got 3 recommendations today, and they've all got layers and points that go along with them. But there are 3 basics that we would like this committee to consider today. The first begins with federal investment. And this is how we can leverage the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and getting money out the door strategically to invest in our nation's supply chain and what will make us more competitive on the global stage of trade. As has been said with others, this must have a whole of government approach and coordination through what Secretary Raimondo mentioned as the Supply Chain Disruptions Task Force, chaired by the agencies in transportation, commerce, and agriculture. That coordinated planning and investment should require an update to the National Freight Strategic Plan. It must be multimodal, not just looking in silos at individual areas. While those of us in the port business are extremely heartened out of $1.2 trillion, having $17 billion designated to ports and waterways, that's a good start. But it's also the same amount of money that the country of Singapore is using to move its downtown marine terminal to the west coast of Tuas. And therefore, we need to look at this great start and this collaboration that is now at the federal, state, and local levels in our domain and make it an annual budgeting process. The ability to accelerate all of these areas combined with private sector investment was one of the early thoughts President Biden had, giving that private sector confidence because the United States government is investing heavily in supply chain. This started with the executive order to the formulation of the task force, the hiring, as was already mentioned, of our first ports envoy in John Picari, followed by that of General Lyons joining us and adding supply chain to his title. and the work now that's going to take place in how this strategic monetary investment happens. And we know full well every member of Congress around the country has important investments to make, and we need to share just how important these strategic investments will be, where they pay back dividends on the greatest good for the American citizenry. With that, we also must accelerate supply chain digitization, aggregation, and information sharing, but also, just like we have been great stewards of our bricks and mortar infrastructure, we must show that same proclivity in the cyberspace. And whether it be the work, again, with the Department of Homeland Security and others, the ability to protect that data that we're now all calling to share must be at the forefront of any move forward in digitization. That end-to-end supply chain sharing information, as I've said in this venue before, shows that the United States is decades behind other trading nations. But we have an opportunity now to leapfrog that and rise to prominence once again with respect to world trade. And that plan for sustained investment is exactly what it means. Let's get an annual budgeting process involved to build off this first amount of money in a bipartisan way that can continue to accelerate projects of both physical and digital infrastructure requirements. So that is recommendation number one on federal investment. Second is a plan to increase American exports and drive economic growth and jobs creation. Even reported as recently at the close of quarter one, with the decline in GDP at 1.5%, among many issues in that very complex equation was the fact that our trade gap had widened and become a drag on economic growth in the nation. So first, let's reconstitute the President's Export Council. Ursula was on that council as nominated by the President of the United States when she was the CEO of Xerox. So was Bob Iger when he was the chairman and CEO of Disney. Let's modernize that group of people. Let's get some folks in the chairs today, big thinkers and big minds to help drive what we need to do to get the American exporter back in the international game. This must continue with work across all agencies and departments to not only identify our existing book of business, but that which is offering in potential markets for U.S. agriculture, manufacturing, and other export sectors. Without even a smile, the United States Secretary of Commerce is our top salesperson, and we need to give her the tools to be able to coordinate this international push to get our export community back. We also need to ensure fair access to foreign markets and secure the commitments from both exporters and their partners overseas. A lot of that work will also involve the U.S. Trade Representative in addition to the agencies that were mentioned. And it goes back to our core tenet of this whole of government approach. And finally, we need to align those federal efforts to support provisioning of the supply chain equipment and infrastructure to achieve that reliable and predictable supply chain in a cost-effective manner to really rise up to the challenge of more volume throughput and more goods that are moving across to international partners. Just as we've talked about with federal investment in the IIJA, this part of American exports has got to answer an age-old question of how we create these round-trip and triangulated economics for the private sector. Much of American imports go to metropolitan areas where many consumers live and buy in large quantities. But there's a tremendous amount of American export that resides in rural America, whether it be on farmland or manufacturing sectors, and how to get rail, truck service, capital equipment between those metro areas and the farmlands and other manufacturing settings is really the task at hand. Some of that will rely on data. Others will require the input of those big thinkers. That closer coordination on freight planning of investment is key to supporting exports. That more recent phenomenon that we've witnessed during this import surge over the last 2 years is that the American exporter has been largely left behind. And while there has been legislation and a tremendous amount of activity in the nation's capital, state capitals, as well as on Wall Street, we have to have a cohesive plan to be able to do this. Assessing the impact of tariffs broadly and on specific equipment and infrastructure buildouts will be key as well. And I'll give you the same qualifying statement that I gave to the president myself. We don't want to succumb to any trading nation who does not share our ideals on worker rights, rules-based trade, or our environmental stewardship. But there's got to be a laser shot approach to kickstart this export program and make imports more affordable as we look directly in the eye of 8.6% inflation. In addition, we want to explore tax credits and other ways of thanking companies to get back into this particular mix. We've got to find ways with 11.4 million jobs open nationwide to be able to drive good talent into these sectors and have the ability to pull in the most modern equipment that can really catapult the American worker into participating in the export arena. And then lastly, with the passing of the Ocean Shipping Reform Act signed by the president just in the last 2 weeks, we have to support these areas in a manner by which export growth can finally take advantage and help us improve that supply chain fluidity. So that is recommendation number 2, all about how we can increase and improve American exports. Our final recommendation really capsulizes what we've all been challenged with for these past 2 years. And for us in the supply chain, whether ports, land transportation, air, or water, it's how we attract, recruit, and retain the workforce for today and tomorrow. Whether it be young folks that see an opportunity in our sector or people my age that simply have to be upskilled and reskilled to continue their careers. It's called workforce development because it's not simply just training and then leaving the individuals on their own to find work in the future. It's about how we develop this nation's workforce. And with the proper training, how we partner with high road private sector companies to bring that circle together. And that starts with encouraging those employers, both private and public sector, to recruit and retain that talent. And specifically, the Department of Commerce working with the Department of Labor to ensure that employers can create career paths in their own workforce and the ability to recruit and attract others. Establishing a specific communication strategy to highlight best practices across employer-run programs. What can we learn from private sector? How can we apply it to others who are just absolutely wanting and have the ambition to do more hiring, but just don't have the tools to do it just yet? And that's businesses of all sizes throughout the country. Once again, it's taking a big bite out of what we need to do, but at a time where a developed plan can lead us to future success. The development of workforce infrastructure is also key. Here in California, soon to be signed by Governor Gavin Newsom, is a new fiscal year budget that will include $110 million for the nation's first goods movement training campus. So we talk about supply chain, international trade, and all the work that we need to do, but we've got to have that infrastructure in place to train that workforce, whether it be the classroom setting, the work on equipment, the skills, the accreditation, partnering with community college, and so many others that can help us really accelerate the development of folks already in our industry and those that want to join us. In addition to that, as Director D spoke earlier, we need to absolutely get on board with having a workforce that's skilled in the transition to cleaner and zero emission equipment. Folks who do mechanic and repair work today using a wrench are and will continue to use computers to tune up that equipment. We've got to make those skills and that available training ready for everyone. And then finally, in recommendation number 3 is the support of the transition into the freight industry. We are not immune, much like other industries and other sectors in the United States, yet we know we're competing against those other industries. We've got to show how we can be more attractive as employers to a workforce that has choice today not unlike anything we've seen in recent history. And so working with the Departments of Labor and Transportation to implement the president's trucking action plan. Much has been said around that nationwide. Here in the port business, especially in Southern California, I would attest to you, we don't have a shortage of truck drivers. We've got a shortage of good jobs. The state of California has issued more than 640,000 commercial driver's licenses, yet a lot of our folks who do business around the ports have gone to other sectors. Parcel delivery, work for the U.S. Post Office, packaged goods, and maybe even out of the industry. Again, trying to become an attractive employer is key to this, and following the lead of the federal government and their initiatives can help bring private sector partners along. And then there are some nuances that are really exciting, such as how we can transition returning veterans into the goods movement industry. Many have skills around mechanics, logistics, supply chain, as well as driving heavy-duty machinery. How do we get them accelerated into our industry as an opportunity for great middle-class jobs? Part of the recommendations that came from experts like Sean O'Brien and Mike Perdue on the labor side was, how do we streamline background checks? How do we have a process that makes sense out of a very changing societal conversation? And then lastly, the reciprocity issue for truck drivers moving to different states, national licenses, and even looking at the age of drivers with the proper training and education around the different classes of vehicles in land transportation and supply chain distribution. So that is the third recommendation around workforce development in these three larger categories, but highly dependent on cross-agency work, federal level. And Mr. Co-Chair, I'll turn it back to you for the next step in the process.
Thanks, Gene, and thanks to the subcommittee for all the hard work in producing these three sets of recommendations. As you can tell, they're well thought out and quite thorough. Let's open the floor for questions. We have a couple here. Let's start with Jason Craig.
I think Hal had his hand up first. I'm going to defer to him.
Okay, Hal.
Oh, it looks like he didn't.
Thank you. So go ahead, Jason. Go ahead. Oh, okay. Well, thanks, Jason. That's very kind. Gene, thanks for a great set of recommendations. Now, I noticed that some recommendations are at a more specific level and some are on a more general level. I think that seems to be also what Revathi presented. And maybe as a result, Liz has voiced some of her reservations, right? Because it's not specific enough. So Gene, and especially caught my attention is the digitization and end-to-end data sharing. Because I think to me, that's exactly what we would have recommended too, but in the data subcommittee, but we thought that that's too general, too high level. You need to recommend something more specific, exactly how to do it, how exactly it's going about, versus at a high level. At a high level, I would be all for it. As I said, yes, definitely more data sharing, integration, end to end. I cannot say no to it. Yeah. So, but would that be sufficient as a recommendation? Maybe we need more work. Yeah. So that's a comment that I have. For instance, access to foreign market. Definitely, yes. Well, how can I say no to that? Let's make sure we work on getting more access to foreign markets. But it's the how part that recommendation is most difficult. How exactly do it? So it's same through the data. Data is how exactly do you build a system that would encourage people to share, and what kind of data to share, and how do you make use of it? Yeah. So it was just more a comment, Gene, not exactly a question. But in terms of your recommendation, I support all three of them.
Yeah, Professor Howe, thanks for the comments. And this is exactly what we thought. This being my third term on this FACA committee, job number one for us was to get the attention of the United States Secretary of Commerce, the director of the National Economic Council, and others. If they thought that these three ideas were good, then the work begins. But first off, we wanted to make sure in these three categories of getting money out the door faster and strategically, The second piece around building a real export program or dusting off some of the great things that this country has done in the past. And then thirdly, how we really take workforce development to a higher level, given what we're experiencing today. If those three categories were met with support from our contemporaries on this committee and those two cabinet members, then we get to work, and we'll have plenty of specificity in the days and weeks ahead. But I really appreciate your commentary.
Well, very good. I think, Gene, if you are successful doing this, and I'm for it, it makes our subcommittee easier then, right? Okay.
And we will continue to collaborate. Absolutely,
Okay.
Professor. Thank you.
Let me just add, just before then I'll move to Jason, how I would split your feedback into two pieces. One is, as Gene just said, we'll work after this meeting ends with the department to understand which of the recommendations seem most appealing, and then get to work, as Gene suggested, to flesh them out and make them as detailed and specific as possible. And then the second is, I heard you essentially raising your hand and volunteering the data subcommittee to help with the specific recommendation on data from the Port and Freight Committee. So thank you for that, for raising your hand. Okay, let's go to Jason.
Hey, before Jason goes, can everyone put their mics on mute, please? I got a lot of feedback on my end over here.
That might be mine. Sorry.
Well, it was yours, Jason. You want to just go ahead and give it a try?
Yep. So, Gene, I know. So I was on the subcommittee. So thank you for all your work. But one thing that I wanted to make clear on the labor workforce development is when it says the freight goods movement industry, I want to make sure, and I don't think we need an amendment to it, but we mean the government side as well. And what I mean by that is the workforce at customs, the workforce at public entities like the Port of LA, and our partners in goods movement who are employed by governments of all different types. So again, I just think when we communicate these recommendations, that the secretary doesn't just think about private sector workforce development, but also government workforce development, because a world-class supply chain needs a world-class customs agency and a world-class port as well.
1000%. And to that note too, Jason, as Gary Kelly had recommended during our subcommittee work, infrastructure is a whole host of issues, both bricks and mortar as well as digital, and not just to look at your port, your airport, your bridges and tunnels, but your pipelines, how you distribute energy, grid resiliency, et cetera. So there's a lot that's going to go into this next level, and I appreciate you raising that for the entire group. Thank you.
I think Tom had his hand up next. Tom?
Sure, thanks. And Gene and the committee, really good recommendations. I'll be voting for all of them and strongly support them, particularly around freight optimization, the data sharing, cybersecurity, and certainly resiliency of a strong freight industry workforce. I think you brought up a point, Gene, that I just want to reinforce, which is I think the importance of not just a focus on imports, but the big streamline that's needed is on exports, and particularly at the ports in terms of strengthening global commerce. And so just double down on the support. I know you mentioned that, Gene, but I think if as this moves forward, keeping the focus on the export side, not just the import side there, of streamlining the processes.
Great. Thanks for that emphasis, Tom.
Liz?
Yeah, thank you, Gene. That was an outstanding presentation. And I wanted to also echo my support for your comment around there's a lot of talk about a labor shortage, but there's really a shortage of good high wage jobs, which we would agree with, that needs to be factored into this equation. But the one concern I had was this particular subcommittee doesn't have a staff working group. And I know in the manufacturing subcommittee, and Willie may disagree because our staff working group is very robust, but it really does offer an opportunity for more voices, more perspectives. And, you know, since this is a principles only conversation when we meet as subcommittees, it often limits the amount of feedback that people can bring to the table. So I was just, my question is there a way to institute some kind of staff level working group? Because I know in the labor movement, for example, we have a real depth and breadth of expertise, as you know, across all modes of transportation, that I know we could bring a lot of rich ideas and thought to the table. But I think it's been difficult because if a principal can't make the meeting for some reason, then it kind of cuts off the ability to channel in ideas and feedback. So I just wanted to put that forward because I think in this particular subcommittee, there's some hunger to actually participate more fully and bring additional ideas and creativity to the table.
No, great thoughts, Liz. And in our subcommittee, it was really interesting because in addition to the principals, we had staff from companies like Sunkist, from Lowe's, from Southwest Airlines, the associations that joined us, in addition to our folks here at the Port of Los Angeles, I mentioned. Again, part of what I wanted to bring today were these big concepts. And as we go forward to get into the work details, doors open to everybody. You know, and on our team, we had Sean O'Brien, the president of the Teamsters, Mike Perdue, longtime member of the ILW officers group here in Southern California, and now they're head of government affairs. Unfortunately, both guys had other commitments, and Mike is in bargaining right now with the Employers Association. But hey, we welcome the doors open. And if you have ideas on individuals, organizations, or others that could join this next step, oh, we're all for it. I think it's really great. Thanks, Liz.
Okay, are there any other questions or comments? If not, let's move to a vote on each set of recommendations. So I'll remind you of the topic, and then I'd ask for everyone to use the same approach. We'll click raise hand when I ask for ayes, and same for those who are opposed. So the very first set of recommendations, the topic is targeted federal investments to support efficient systems for key regions and economic sectors. All those in favor, please click the raise hand button. Okay, thank you. All those opposed? So let's lower your hands first. We lost, I'm going to assume, Rick, are you still? Slower your, okay, good. And let's, anybody opposed to this first set of recommendations, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. Let's move to the second, which is about exports. So it's increase American exports to drive economic growth and job creation. Please raise your hand if you support this set of recommendations. Liz, are you in favor of this one? This is the second one, the export.
I'm abstaining just because of the lack of the between meeting input. We've spoken with a few of the unions who would prefer to, in the next round, pick up with more feedback between meetings and more ability to engage. So I've been asked, to sort of abstain from the vote.
Okay, noted. Let's lower our hands, please. And then anyone, so we've got Liz is abstaining. Anyone opposed to these recommendations, please raise your hand.
Hey, Jeff, this is Rich. Seems like Mr. Ball has his hand up there, though. He's got to somehow get that down.
He had left his, there we go. Okay, thank you. All right, so there are no opposed, there's one abstain, and that's noted. And the third is to promote the development and resiliency of the freight industry workforce. Please raise your hand if you support. And Liz, I assume the comment you just made applies to this one as well.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, and okay, please lower your hand. And then all those opposed, I'm gonna wait till we click off Gary's and David's, there we go. David, okay, and all those opposed, please raise your hand. Okay. Thank you. Well, thank you, Gene and subcommittee, for your leadership and your incredibly thoughtful recommendations. And clearly we have more work to do, but made a lot of progress in a short period of time. And we thank you for the work. We've now come to the end of our scheduled agenda. The presentations and more detailed supporting documentation presented by our 3 distinguished subcommittees to Secretary Raimondo and team today include concrete steps that we can implement now, actions that will take some time to organize, as we've just discussed, and ideas for further work that need much more fleshing out. We expect our subcommittees to continue to meet and to work on this important challenge, and we'll get some feedback from the department as well as all of the participants today to help us to narrow down our focus as we move to the next set of subcommittee meetings before our meeting in October. As I noted up front, our charter remains to characterize our nation's supply chain system, reduce the number and impact of surprises, and decide where we want the bottlenecks to be, and to propose changes for government and industry that will allow us to increase supply chain performance and resilience. Together, we can help improve the effectiveness of our economy, the lives of our citizens, and the strength of our nation. I'd like to thank Secretary Raimondo for pushing us to deliver tangible recommendations right from the beginning that lead to lasting results. I want to thank the rest of the government team, including our designated federal officer, Rich Bohl, the subcommittee leaders, members, and my co-chair, Ursula. We have much more work ahead of us, but I'm confident that we already have some great insights with more to come. And if there's no other business, Rich, is it okay to adjourn?
Good to adjourn. Good meeting.
Okay, thanks everybody. Thanks for your time and dedication.
Thank you all.
Thank you all. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff.
Bye,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thanks, Willie. See you.